And when you talk about what something is going to cost for a non-solution to what I think is the problem, traffic congestion right now, when you talk about the cost, what could that money have been used for? I mean, this isn't money that's just going to sit over in a closet someplace and not be used for anything. What the heck, let's just use it to build something that isn't going to solve the problem. To the extent that we spend it on rail, we can't spend it on sewers. We've got this consent decree, which is a reality, folks. Remember the Felix consent decree and how much is an amazing amount of money that costs the DOE being pushed into the situation where instead of spending money from a standpoint that this community considered the right way to do it, we were forced into the terms of that consent decree. This sewer consent decree is going to cost a huge amount, far more than the minimum that we're required to pay under that. The water supply problem potentially is even more expensive, potentially. And then you've got, when you talk about the unfunded pensions in Hawaii, the much bigger number is the retiree health care benefits, which we had a Hawaii Supreme Court decision last year that said that's part of the retirement benefits that are protected by our state constitution. So it's not just a contractual issue where there's more flexibility in dealing with that going forward. When you add that in to our unfunded pension liability, it's in excess, city and state together, in excess of $25 billion. That's the accrued liability. That's what we owe for what has already been provided. We've got to come up with the money to pay for current pay and benefits to all the work that's going to be done going forward. You just can't ignore facts like that in trying to figure out just how much can we afford to spend on this problem, that problem, or another problem, and especially since even its supporters have acknowledged that rail is not a solution to the traffic congestion problem. It just seems to me from a cost standpoint it makes no sense. From an environmental standpoint, I think the visual thing, the blight, if you will, in terms of what it will look like, is especially important because of tourism in Hawaii. I think it would be very important in any event, especially because of, I think, the way it will change the feel of this place. The city has issued all these slick brochures. I get them in the mail, I assume you do as well, that talk in terms of all this energy efficiency, and yet it's based upon things like a weighted average of how much it costs per rider on rail systems, where 60% of that is in New York City, where they're phenomenally efficient. And once you factor that out, because we're not New York City, you factor that out, then you see what you've been hearing is absolutely right, that the use of energy is greater with our proposed elevated heavy rail system, even if you don't look to what we assume will be improvements so far as mileage with cars is concerned. The environment, I could go on, this transit-oriented development, I personally think what this is all about, the people who are backing rail, who are on the inside, I think what this is about is that they're trying to get this thing going and have a certain momentum so that when they're not getting all this development, then they say, well, we've got to waive this requirement, we've got to provide that subsidy, and goodbye the prime farmland. You think traffic is bad now? When they start doing all of the additional construction that I think this is all about, without really doing anything to reduce traffic congestion, I think it's going to be dramatically worse, even worse than what they're projecting, and they're projecting that it's going to be considerably worse than what it is right now. The economy, I'm personally offended when I read these slick brochures and they say we're going to have an average of 10,000 jobs a year during construction, 17,000 during the peak years, and it's all written as though we're going to say, wow, that's a lot of jobs here in Hawaii. Well, they know it's not here in Hawaii. This modeling program they've used is not even trying to figure out how many of those jobs are in Italy, for example, where Ansaldo has their $1.4 million contract. How many of those jobs are going to be in Great Britain or some place where Parsons Brinkerhoff, who has nearly $500 million in contracts, some place where where their people who have experience in building elevated heavy rail systems are located. The mainland construction company, I could go on. A lot of the jobs created in spending this 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever $billion it's going to be, a lot of those jobs are outside of Hawaii. You remember last August, there was a month, it was August of 2011, when the net job creation that month was zero. It's almost exactly zero. And this was at a time when the Obama administration was really hopeful that we were kind of turning the corner, and they were thinking that there'd be a significant net number that particular month, and it was dead zero. And to their credit, spokespeople from the Obama administration said, you know what, this is a disappointment. It's zero, but we think it's going to get better, and they dealt with that issue. Well, that month, there were a lot of new jobs, but there was an equal number of jobs lost, and it was the net number that was important. That's the only number that's relevant. That's the only number that the Obama administration talked about. In Hawaii, they talk about this 10,000 as though that's the important number. That's a gross number. That's not a net number. They're making no effort whatsoever to figure out if you take $3, $4 billion out of the local economy in order to pay for rail, that's going to have an effect on jobs. It is. Nobody can tell you exactly how many jobs that's going to affect, but we know it is, and part of this modeling should be an honest attempt to look at everything that's relevant, and in this case, you need to factor in how many are likely to be outside of Hawaii. You need to factor in what is the net number of new jobs. Two guys out in the economics department at UH tell me they think it's going to net to zero. Going to net to zero under the circumstances, especially when you factor in the economic inefficiencies during those many years of construction. I don't know. I just know that 10,000 jobs on the average figure is absolutely crazy. The Iwi Kapuna, you know, the bones, you know why they're starting out here rather than downtown. I mean, it would make so much sense to start downtown so that as you're building out, you're able to use what's been built. It's not just sitting there for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, whatever. But they're starting out here because it's going to be relatively easy out here. They're not going to run into Iwi out here. They're not going to run into major construction problems like when they get to the fill land downtown. And so the expectation is that they're going to have so much track, they're going to have so much money spent, that by the time they get to where they're going to be really huge issues, they're going to feel like it's just so much momentum that they're way past the point of no return. There's going to be all kinds of pressure on everybody just to let them finish the thing. If they started downtown and ran into the kind of problems like they are at Kauai Hao Church, for example, there would be huge problems in getting anything done. They want to just steamroller through that area, and that's why they're starting out here.